Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up. So I am not going to do much of an intro because I read a ton in January. Total, I read 10 novels, 1 graphic novel, and 1 novella, which is kind of insane, and I know I will not be reading this much for the remainder of the year. But it is a very good start to, my goal of reading 100 books this year, but I have a lot to talk about, so let's just jump in order and talk about the books that I read in January. The first book that I read in January, I'm gonna scoot over so I can throw a picture. The first book that I read in January is The Mystery of the Blue Train by Agatha Christie, and this is, of course, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Basically, this is another murder on a train, which is really interesting since the only other Agatha Christie I've read is a murder on a train. It follows a train that is going to, the Mediterranean, I believe, and there is a woman on board as well as a cursed jewel, and by the time they arrive at their destination, the woman on the train is dead and the jewel is gone, and so Hercule Poirot just happens to be on the train and he shows up to solve the mystery. This was a really fun book, a really fun Agatha Christie mystery. I love Agatha Christie, and this just reminded me of how much I wanted to read more by her. It is just an engrossing mystery that allows you to figure it out as you go, but also leaves a little bit to the imagination, so you're still kind of taken by surprise every now and then by the twists and turns of the mystery. So I really enjoyed this one. I actually read it fairly quickly considering it is an older book and those take me a little bit to get through, and I wound up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read, this is when I started doing TBR Takedown, which was a readathon I participated in at the beginning of the month. I read 5 books in that week, and you can go and watch my vlog and kind of semi-wrap up of that if you want, so I will kind of wrap these books up again. The first one that I finished during TBR Takedown was The 13th Reality, The Void of Mist and Thunder by James Dashner. This is the 4th and final book in the 13th Reality series, which is a series I have been reading for a very long time. I started reading it probably when I was in junior high, and now I have finally finished it. And unfortunately, as much as I really loved the rest of the series, I don't think that this was a very great finale. I can't really tell you that much about this 4th book, but I will say that the 13th Reality series is just sort of about this world where there are multiple realities, and there's a group called the Realitants, I think, and they are just supposed to be kind of the watchers over all of the realities, and each of the realities is very, very different, and yeah, it's a very interesting premise, and the first 3 books are really, really excellent, and are books that I've really loved, but unfortunately this book fell flat. For me, the most noticeable thing about it is that James Dashner is also the author of the Maze Runner series, and I don't know, it just felt a lot like he kind of paid less attention to this series once he started writing The Maze Runner. That could be completely untrue, but that's just how it felt when I was reading it. I just felt like as much attention wasn't quite given to this book. I felt like it was very tell and not show, like every paragraph was like, and then he felt this, which then changed to this feeling, which then changed to this feeling, and it just kind of annoyed me how straightforward it was, and while I liked the ending, it just wasn't as satisfying to me as I wanted it to be, so unfortunately, although I really like this series, I wound up giving this last one a 2.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished during TBR Takedown was Cinder by Marissa Meyer, and I am so glad that I finally got a start on the Lunar Chronicles series. There are, I believe, 4 books total in the Lunar Chronicles series, as well as a kind of side book. I don't know if it's a novella or just a kind of side novel, and I'm really hoping that I'll be able to get to the rest of them this year because this was a really fun start of a series. Cinder takes place in the future in a place called New Beijing, and it follows the lead character Cinder, who is a cyborg and a mechanic. And this is a sci-fi retelling of Cinderella, of course. I thought Cinder was a really fun and interesting character, and I actually really liked the character of Prince Kai. He just kind of got me immediately, which I wasn't expecting, and that made it a lot more fun to read this story. My only problem with it was that at some points, the plot twists that kind of happened at the end seemed really predictable, and not the, Cinderella elements of the story. Of course, those are going to be predictable, but some of the other narratives that happened, I just felt like I already knew were going to happen at the beginning, and so they didn't give me that shock value at the end that I wanted, but it was a really, really fun first book and a very fascinating world, and I was already really passionate about Cinder and Kai, and that doesn't usually happen that I get that passionate about a ship in the first book, but I am. So overall, I gave this first book, 4 out of 5 stars, and I cannot wait to read the rest in the series. I'm thinking maybe over the summer. The third book that I read for TBR Takedown was A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This was the edition illustrated by Jim Kay, and it was inspired by the story by Siobhan Dowd, I believe. And this is possibly going to go on my favorite books of the year list. So I don't want to give too much away about this book. I didn't really know much going in, and I really liked that about it. But basically, the main point is that in the middle of the night, a monster shows up to a boy named Connor's window, and the monster is not the one that Connor's been expecting, and the monster just wants Connor to tell the truth. I know that's kind of a vague summary, but I just don't want to give that much away. This book is such an emotional book, and it's such a beautiful ride. I knew at the beginning it kind of gives you a definite direction of where it's going, but even though I knew where the story was leading, I still fell absolutely in love with it, and I cried for the last 100 pages. If I had the book with me, I could show you all my little blue tabs along the side of this book because I cried for half of the book. Connor goes on such an emotional journey, and I think that this is such an important book in terms of kind of understanding a child's emotions when something really dramatic is going on in their lives. It's just a very good exploration of how Connor is dealing with these really intense emotions as a younger boy, and I think it's just a really important book. I absolutely love this book, and of course I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Oh, and side note, the illustrations were beautiful. The next book that I finished for TBR Takedown was Life as We Knew It by Susan Beth Pfeffer. I did a full spoiler-free review of this, so you can go and check that out, and I won't talk about it for too long. But basically this follows a girl named Miranda's diary when a meteor knocks the moon closer to the Earth and causes a series of really dramatic natural disasters and kind of leads to the world beginning to end. It is dramatic, it is fast-paced, it is very difficult to read, and I got very emotionally attached to the characters, and I wound up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. But if you want to know more, of course you can go and watch my review. And the final book that I read for TBR Takedown was Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. This is another book on BookTube that I've seen a lot of people really love, and fortunately I just did not love it at all. I really liked the first half. That is what I will say, is that I really enjoyed that, but I didn't like the second half, and I especially did not like the end of the book. I felt like this book got to be very emotionally manipulative, and it was written to make people cry. And it didn't make me cry because I felt like that manipulation was really obvious when I was reading it. Basically, this book follows a woman named Louisa, and she's kind of got this really steady life. She has a boyfriend. She has just been fired from her job, and so she winds up getting a job as kind of a caretaker for a quadriplegic man, and that's just kind of where it takes off. But yeah, I just thought that this book was too emotionally manipulative for me, and I thought it was too obvious that it was emotionally manipulative, so I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't cry. I didn't get emotionally connected to any of the characters because I saw from the beginning, when you find out sort of a huge plot point of the book, as soon as I found that out, I was like, oh, I know how this book's gonna end. So I wish I would have enjoyed this one more. I really liked how the beginning was written. I really liked how Louisa and Will's relationship was developed, as well as some of the side characters. I thought they were interesting, but I don't want to read the second in the duology, and I just didn't wind up loving this book, and I wound up giving it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. After that, I picked up a book that I'd started at the beginning of the month, and I finished reading Afterworlds by Scott Westerfeld. Basically, this book follows 2 storylines, that of Darcy, who is 19 and is just getting her first young adult book published, and the other is her actual book that she's writing following her main character, Lizzie, and that is a paranormal romance. Here is my problem with this book. Darcy's story was really fantastic, and I just wanted a whole book of that. I thought that Darcy was a lot more interesting, and her story was a lot more interesting, and I didn't like the paranormal romance at all. At all. I was like annoyed every time I was reading it, and I started to consider skipping those chapters. Then I didn't want to because I know they're also revealing kind of how Darcy develops as a writer. I didn't like the romance of that part of it, but I did really like the romance of Darcy. This is an LGBTQIA+ book. Darcy is a queer character. I don't think it ever specifically says where she identifies, but I believe she's a lesbian. I think that's kind of what is established in this book. So unfortunately, I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. I really like Darcy's storyline, but my dislike of Lizzie's storyline was enough to drag down my rating significantly, so I wish that I'd really liked this more because this was a monster of a book and it took me forever to get through. The next book that I read was Invasion of the Tearling by Erika Johansen, and this is the second book in the Queen of the Tearling series, and it was fantastic. I can't explain too much what this book is about, again, because it is a sequel, but Queen of the Tearling is a wonderful fantasy that takes place in a regressed future. It's a very weird setting, it throws some people off, but I think it's fantastic. Kelsey continues to be a really fascinating character. There was also a different storyline that happened in this book that was introduced that was amazing. When it first started, I wasn't really sure if I was gonna like it, and by the end, I was like, oh, I'm just as invested in this storyline as I am with Kelsey's. This book ended on a huge cliffhanger. I can't believe I have to wait until, what, like, November for the final book. I'm definitely gonna try to get an arc, because I need more of this book immediately. I believe the third one's called The Fate of the Tearling. Overall, fantastic book, 4.5 out of 5 stars, just like the first one. Actually, before I read Invasion of the Tearling, I forgot. I read Desert of the Heart by Jane Rule. I completely forgot this book existed, which is probably a pretty good indication of how I felt about it. So this book follows a character named Evelyn, and she goes to Reno to get a divorce, and she ends up staying at this kind of home while she's there that a lot of divorced women stay at while they are waiting like the 6 weeks necessary to get a divorce. And while she's there, she meets a girl named Anne, and the two kind of fall in love. This is an older book. It is kind of a classic piece of lesbian fiction, so I was really interested in reading it, and unfortunately I didn't like it at all. My problem with a couple of the lesbian books that I've read recently, this was reminding me of Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, that's what it was reminding me of, is that these classic pieces of lesbian fiction are way too steeped in metaphor, and I just want the story. I don't want to have to dig through all of these deeper meanings to get to the romance, and that really bothered me about this book a lot more than it did in Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. I just felt like I never really understood any of the characters. They kept kind of switching what they were feeling, and that really bothered me. I don't know, this book really, really frustrated me, because I felt like I never understood it. It was just so confusing. I did wind up giving this book a 2 out of 5 stars, and right after I finished it, I wound up watching the movie that is based on this book called Desert Hearts, which is loosely based, and wouldn't you know it, even though that was really different, didn't love that one either. Another, like, really important piece of, like, queer cinema. It was very important, and I just didn't love how that one was done either. So overall, unfortunately, the storyline has disappointed me in 2 ways, and that makes me sad. After Invasion of the Tearling, I read Watchers by Dean Koontz. That's right, I finished my second Dean Koontz book, and unfortunately, while this didn't quite live up to Phantoms, but I mean, that was a pretty high bar, so yeah. The plot of this book is basically that there is this facility, like a medical facility, and they produce this dog of really extreme intelligence as well as a much darker creature who kind of looks like a demon. It's a hybrid monster, it's scary, and it's dangerous. And basically, both of these creatures escape from that lab on the same day. This was dramatic, this was interesting, and my favorite part about it was the dog. Okay, I am not a dog person at all. Halfway through this book, Einstein, the dog, I would die for this dog. This fictional dog, whatever he wanted. I just kept crying about this dog. I mean, obviously Dean Koontz loves dogs. This is the picture on the back of the book, and Einstein is a golden retriever, so he was inspired. The issues I had with this mostly was that I didn't like the way that Dean Koontz wrote the female character they had in this book. There was just the one, Nora, and it felt really weird and inauthentic. I just didn't like how she was written, and I didn't like how the romance in this book was written. It was really cheesy at times, and that made it difficult to read. And so, while I did love Einstein, and I thought this was scary, and it provided a really interesting and kind of complex villain, I gave this book a 3.75 out of 5 stars. This wrap-up is so long, I'm sorry, I'm trying to hurry. Yesterday, I started and finished a graphic novel all in one go, and that was Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. I finally got to read Nimona. So basically the plot of this book is that it follows Nimona, and she is a shapeshifter, and she becomes the sidekick to Ballister Blackheart, and he is a villain, and basically when Nimona shows up, she just wants to make all of his villainous plots more evil. but he just doesn't really want to do that. This book was so much fun, and it was so funny. I laughed out loud multiple times while I was reading it. It was creative and interesting. It reminded me of how much I love Lumberjanes, which is the comic series that Noelle Stevenson worked on. Nimona was such an interesting character, and I love the relationship between Blackheart and Golden Lion. And overall, this was just a fantastic graphic novel. I loved the ending. I thought it was really interesting, and it was such a complex story for a graphic novel that created a fantastic world. I loved this graphic novel, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And finally, the novella that I read was Warm Up by V.E. Schwab. This is a novella for Vicious, which is a book that I read last year, and I just heard about it on Riley Marie's channel, I believe, and I was like really interested because I loved Vicious, so I looked this up. I'm not counting reading this towards my like goal at the end of the year of 100 books. This was just something that I kind of looked up and read. It was a novella that came out before Vicious, and I think it was just kind of to get people excited about Vicious, and it follows a different character who has a near-death experience and gains an ability. This was just a really fun novella. If you're not sure if you want to read Vicious, I would recommend looking up Warm Up and reading it. It is free, I believe, to read on the Tor website. That's where I found it. I will leave a link below so you can go and read it. But if you're not sure if you want to read Vicious, I think that this novella gives, or just the short story in general, gives a very good idea of kind of the tone of the book, and it's just really well written, and it was really great. It was really dark, which is what I liked about Vicious, but it was really great. I gave it kind of a 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, that is the end of my wrap-up. This was an insanely long wrap-up. I hopefully will be able to cut this down a bit, but not much. I feel like this is going to be long. I wish that I'd had a stronger reading month. I feel like I had too many mediocre books in here, which makes me sad, but I am excited going into February to just get some new books in there and start some new stuff. I won't be reading nearly as much because now I'm back in school. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them. And let me know what your favorite book was that you read this January. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!